A massive announcement just came out of Israel that changes everything you thought you knew about the Gaza situation. On Tuesday morning, December 23rd, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz stood in front of cameras at a settlement in the West Bank and said something shocking. He said Israel would never fully withdraw from Gaza. Never. But here's where it gets really interesting, and you need to hear this. He didn't just say Israel would stay. He said they'd build permanent military settlements in northern Gaza to replace the ones they left back in 2005, the same settlements that were supposed to be gone forever. And get this announcement completely contradicts a major peace agreement that the United States just helped create, an agreement signed just 2 months ago by both Israel and Hamas, an agreement that specifically says Israel must fully withdraw from Gaza. So, what exactly is happening here, and why does it matter so much? Before we get into the bombshell details, you need to understand what was supposed to happen according to the peace plan. Back in late September 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump stood beside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House and unveiled a massive 20-point peace proposal. The goal was simple on paper: stop the fighting in Gaza, get hostages released, and eventually rebuild Gaza under new leadership. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1 started on October 10th and called for an immediate ceasefire. Israeli forces would pull back to something called the Yellow Line. This yellow line was supposed to mark where Israeli troops would stay while Hamas released all the hostages they were holding, both living hostages and the remains of those who had died. In exchange, Israel would release Palestinian prisoners, thousands of them. The agreement was clear. Fighting stops. Hostages come home. Troops pull back to the Yellow Line. That was just Phase 1. But Phase 2 and 3 are where things get really complicated. Phase 2 was supposed to involve something huge. Complete Israeli military withdrawal from all of Gaza. Not partial, not most of it. All of it. The plan called for an international stabilization force to come in. This would be troops from countries like Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and possibly some European nations. They'd work with a new Palestinian government made up of technocrats. These are basically professional administrators with no ties to Hamas or any other political faction. They'd run day-to-day operations in Gaza, build schools, fix hospitals, get the water running again. And here's the kicker. This whole operation would be overseen by something called the Board of Peace, a committee chaired by Donald Trump himself. Other world leaders would join. Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair was mentioned as a possible member. Trump's advisors like Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff would help run things. The Board of Peace would handle funding. They'd coordinate reconstruction efforts, make sure money went to the right places, and gradually hand control over to the Palestinian Authority once reforms were complete. That was the vision: a Gaza free from Hamas control, free from Israeli military occupation, a place where Palestinians could rebuild their lives without constant bombing, without checkpoints everywhere, without soldiers patrolling their neighborhoods. The United Nations Security Council even voted to approve this plan back on November 17th. 13 countries voted yes. Nobody voted no. Russia and China abstained but didn't block it. This gave the plan international legal backing. It wasn't just some proposal floating around, it was official UN policy. So we had an agreement. Israel signed it. Hamas agreed to it. The UN approved it. And for about 2 months, something that kind of looked like peace existed in Gaza. Israeli forces did pull back from some areas. Hamas released hostages. Not all of them yet, but some. Aid trucks started rolling in. People tried to go back to what was left of their homes. But underneath the surface, problems were growing. Big problems. According to the Gaza government media office, Israel violated the ceasefire 875 times between October 10th and December 22nd. 875 violations. Let that sink in. These violations included direct shootings at civilians. 265 times Israeli forces shot at Palestinian civilians. Military vehicles driving into residential areas. 49 separate incursions into neighborhoods. Bombings and attacks on civilian homes. 421 attacks, just constant bombardment. Demolition of Palestinian property. 150 incidents of Israeli forces destroying homes, shops, and infrastructure. All of this while a ceasefire was supposedly in effect. The human cost is devastating. 411 Palestinians killed since the ceasefire began, over 1,100 injured, and these numbers come from just the last 2 months. 2 months when fighting was supposed to have stopped. The aid situation tells another grim story. The ceasefire agreement said Israel must allow 600 trucks of humanitarian supplies into Gaza every single day. 600 trucks. That was the deal. Food, medicine, tents, blankets, building materials. Everything Palestinians desperately needed after 2 years of war. But according to official tracking, only 17,819 trucks entered Gaza between October 10th and December 22nd. That's an average of 244 trucks per day, not 600, less than half of what was promised. Israel blocked essential supplies, including meat, dairy products, and vegetables. Winter storms hit Gaza hard in recent weeks. People living in tents got soaked, makeshift shelters collapsed, and Israel refused to let enough tents and blankets cross the border. The UN called the situation a deepening humanitarian crisis. The Palestinian Ministry of Health warned that 62% of needed medicines weren't available. People couldn't get basic antibiotics. Hospitals that survived the bombing couldn't treat patients properly. But even with all these violations, most people still believed the bigger plan would eventually happen. Israel would eventually pull out completely. The international force would deploy. A new government would take over. That hope existed until Tuesday, December 23rd. That's when Defense Minister Israel Katz made his stunning announcement. Speaking at a ceremony in the settlement of Beit El in the occupied West Bank, Katz laid out a completely different vision for Gaza's future. He said Israel is deep inside Gaza and will never leave all of it. Never. He used those exact words. There will never be such a thing as a complete withdrawal. Then he went further. Katz announced plans to establish what he called Nahal settlements in northern Gaza. These are military agricultural communities. Young Israelis enlist in the army together through a program called Garinei Nahal. They serve as soldiers but also prepare to form permanent civilian communities. These settlements have a specific history in Israel. They were used for decades to establish Israeli presence in disputed territories. Soldiers would set up an outpost, farm the land. Eventually, civilians would join them. The military base would transform into a regular settlement. Israel pulled all of these settlements out of Gaza back in 2005. 21 settlements total. About 8,500 Israeli settlers lived in Gaza before the withdrawal. It was controversial then, and remains controversial now. Many Israelis opposed leaving Gaza. They said it would create a security vacuum. Others said it was necessary for peace. The withdrawal happened anyway, but now Katz says they're going back. When the time is right, Katz said, Israel will build Nahal settlements in northern Gaza to replace the communities that were uprooted. He didn't give a specific timeline, but the message was crystal clear. Israeli settlements are coming back to Gaza. This isn't just about security checkpoints or temporary military positions. He's talking about permanent Israeli communities inside Gaza, with Israeli civilians living there, farming there, raising families there. Katz also said Israel would maintain military control in other areas beyond Gaza. He mentioned Lebanon and Syria. Israeli forces occupy parts of southern Lebanon despite a ceasefire there too. They've been conducting operations inside Syria since the Assad regime fell. And Katz said they won't move 1 millimeter from their positions in Syria. His overall message was that Israel trusts nobody else to provide security. Not international forces, not the UN, not Arab countries, nobody. Only the Israeli military can protect Israeli citizens according to this view. So Israel must stay in Gaza, must stay in Lebanon, must stay in Syria, forever, if necessary. The statement created immediate shockwaves. Far-right settler groups celebrated. The Nechala settlement movement said over 1,000 families are ready to move to Gaza right now. They just need government approval. The Yesha Council, which represents settlements in the West Bank, praised Katz's announcement. They called the 2005 withdrawal a terrible injustice. They said settlement in Gaza strengthens Israel's security, and they added something chilling. They said this move makes clear to the enemy that for the October 7th massacre they will pay with land, permanently. But not everyone in Israel agrees with Katz. Former Defense Minister Gadi Eisenkot, who also served as Chief of Staff of the Israeli military, harshly criticized the announcement. Eisenkot said the government is acting against the broad national consensus. He said Israel voted with one hand to approve Trump's peace plan, but with the other hand it's selling fables about isolated settlement nuclei in Gaza. His point was simple. You can't say yes to a plan that requires full withdrawal while simultaneously announcing you'll never fully withdraw. That's not how agreements work. Eisenkot called the timing critical for Israel's national security. He implied that undermining the peace plan now could restart the war. Netanyahu's office declined to comment on Katz's statement. That silence is telling. Netanyahu has repeatedly said throughout the war that Israel has no plans to resettle Gaza. He said it multiple times to international media. Just this year, he told CNN that Israel wouldn't evict Palestinian residents from Gaza or establish new settlements. So either Netanyahu didn't know Katz would make this announcement, or he's letting Katz float a trial balloon, testing how the world reacts before committing to the policy himself. Hamas condemned Katz's remarks as a serious violation of the ceasefire. Hamas spokesperson Hazem Qasim said the statements directly contradict the ceasefire framework. He said they expose Israel's intention to prolong its war on Gaza. Hamas pointed out that this announcement comes amid 875 ceasefire violations since October, attacks that killed over 400 Palestinians. Hamas sees this as proof that Israel never intended to honor the agreement. Katz's office tried to walk back the comments later on Tuesday. His office released a statement saying the government has no intention of establishing civilian settlements in Gaza. The statement claimed Katz's remarks were made solely in a security context. This is a classic political move. Say something controversial. See how people react. Then issue a clarification that kind of takes it back, but kind of doesn't. The clarification says no civilian settlements, but doesn't mention the military presence. Katz already said Israel will never fully withdraw its military. So even without civilian settlements, Israeli forces would control large parts of Gaza permanently. That still contradicts the Trump peace plan. That still means no Palestinian state. That still means permanent occupation. Here's why this matters so much beyond just Gaza. The Trump peace plan wasn't just about stopping the fighting. It included language about a pathway to Palestinian statehood. The plan said conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood. That language is vague. It doesn't guarantee a Palestinian state. It says maybe, possibly, if certain conditions are met. But even that vague possibility requires Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. You can't have Palestinian self-determination while Israeli military forces occupy the territory. You can't have a Palestinian state that doesn't control its own borders, airspace, or internal security. Every major peace proposal for decades has included the basic principle that Palestinians deserve their own country. The land would include Gaza and the West Bank. East Jerusalem would be the capital. Israel would keep some settlement blocks near the border, but give up most of the occupied territories. This is called the two-state solution. Israel for Israelis. Palestine for Palestinians. Two countries living side by side. Every U.S. president, since Bill Clinton, has supported this vision in some form. Even if they disagreed on details, they agreed on the basic concept. Two states for two peoples. But Israel's current government opposes this completely. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich recently announced plans to annex 82% of the West Bank. Not some of it, most of it. Netanyahu has repeatedly said there will be no Palestinian state. Not now, not ever. Several ministers in his coalition openly advocate for annexing all Palestinian territories and encouraging Palestinians to leave. So when Katz announces permanent military control of Gaza and possible settlement construction, He's not going off script. He's saying out loud what the government already believes. There will be no Palestinian state, ever. Israel will control all the land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Palestinians can live there, but only under Israeli security control. The Trump plan tried to square this circle. It tried to give Israel security guarantees while opening a door to Palestinian statehood. Even a small door, even a distant possibility. But Katz just slammed that door shut. By declaring permanent Israeli military presence in Gaza, the plan falls apart. Phase 2 can't happen if Israel refuses to withdraw. The International Stabilization Force can't deploy if Israeli troops stay. The Palestinian technocratic government can't govern if the Israeli military runs security. The Board of Peace can't oversee reconstruction if fighting continues. The whole carefully constructed framework collapses. And here's what makes it even more complicated. Trump's reaction. So far, Trump hasn't publicly responded to Katz's statement. His administration spent months negotiating this deal. His advisors convinced Arab countries to support it. His UN ambassador pushed through the Security Council resolution. Trump himself chairs the Board of Peace. He's personally invested in making this work. But Trump also has a long history of supporting Israeli settlement expansion. During his first term, he recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. He moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. He released a peace plan that allowed Israel to annex major settlement blocks. Trump is not known for pressuring Israel on settlements. So will he push back against Katz or let it slide? We should know soon because Netanyahu is scheduled to meet with Trump later this month. Trump reportedly wants to discuss moving to Phase 2 of the peace plan. But how do you move to Phase 2 when Israel's defense minister just said Phase 2 will never happen? That meeting could be explosive, or it could be a quiet agreement to pretend everything's fine. Meanwhile, the people actually living in Gaza face an impossible situation. The ceasefire isn't really a ceasefire. Israeli forces kill Palestinians almost every day. Sometimes it's individuals who cross the yellow line. Sometimes it's groups near military positions. Sometimes it's entire families in their homes. Israel says these are all legitimate security operations. They claim every person killed posed a threat. They say Hamas fighters are regrouping and must be stopped. But 411 people killed in 2 months doesn't sound like precision targeting. It sounds like continued war under a different name. Humanitarian conditions get worse by the day. Half the required food isn't reaching people. Medicine runs out in hospitals. 62% of essential drugs are unavailable. Winter storms flood tent camps. Children freeze at night. Israel blocks tents and blankets at the border. The UN calls it a deepening humanitarian crisis. Aid agencies say Israel's actions are genocidal. And now, on top of everything, Palestinians learn that Israeli settlements might return to Gaza, that Israeli forces plan to stay permanently, that the promises of reconstruction and self-governance were empty. The international community faces a choice. They can hold Israel accountable to the agreement it signed. The Security Council resolution authorizes an international stabilization force. That resolution is legally binding. Countries could demand Israel honor it. They could threaten consequences for violations, cut off weapons shipments, impose sanctions, use diplomatic pressure, or they can do nothing. Let Israel rewrite the agreement unilaterally, accept permanent occupation as the new reality. Move on to the next crisis and forget about Gaza. Based on history, the second option seems more likely. Israel has occupied the West Bank for 58 years. 58 years of military control. 58 years of settlements expanding. 58 years of promises that a Palestinian state is just around the corner, but that corner never comes. Gaza might follow the same path: permanent military control, gradual settlement expansion, endless promises of eventual withdrawal. But withdrawal that never actually happens. The people of Gaza trapped in an open-air prison, not quite occupied like the West Bank because Israel pulled out in 2005, but not free either because Israel controls the borders, the airspace, the water, the electricity. Now, even that ambiguous status might end. clear occupation, clear military rule, clear Israeli settlements on Palestinian land. Katz's announcement on December 23rd wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a deliberate policy statement, made publicly, at an official government event, reported across Israeli media. This represents the thinking of powerful figures in Israel's government. Maybe not everyone agrees. Maybe some ministers oppose it. But the defense minister isn't a random backbencher. He controls the military. He makes security decisions. When he says Israel will never fully withdraw from Gaza, that's current policy, not a personal opinion. Policy. And that policy directly contradicts the peace agreement Israel signed 2 months ago. It contradicts the UN Security Council resolution. It contradicts decades of international consensus on Palestinian rights. It contradicts the very idea that this war could end with justice for both peoples. So what happens next matters enormously. Trump could demand Israel stick to the agreement. He could threaten to withhold support. He could make withdrawal a condition for continued U.S. military aid. Arab countries could refuse to participate in the International Stabilization Force unless Israel withdraws first. They could say, we're not sending our soldiers to legitimize occupation. The UN could condemn the settlement plans, pass new resolutions, call emergency Security Council meetings. European countries could impose sanctions, cut trade deals, downgrade diplomatic relations, or everyone could just shrug, issue mild statements of concern, then move on with business as usual. Based on what usually happens, expect a lot of concern statements, a few UN speeches, some critical editorials, then nothing changes. The pattern repeats over and over. Israel does something that violates international law. The world condemns it. Nothing happens. Israel does it again. More condemnation. Still nothing happens. Eventually, the new reality becomes normalized. What seemed impossible becomes just how things are. Settlements that were supposed to be temporary become permanent cities. Occupation that was supposed to last months lasts decades. Wars that were supposed to end keep grinding on. The question isn't really whether Israel will permanently control Gaza. The question is whether anyone will seriously try to stop it. Right now, the answer looks like no. The Trump administration invested heavily in this peace plan. But Trump also supports Israeli expansion. He's not going to threaten real consequences. Arab countries want the conflict resolved, but they're not going to break relations with Israel over Gaza. The relationship with Israel is too valuable economically and strategically. European countries will complain, but they won't act alone without U.S. support. And the UN can pass all the resolutions it wants. Without enforcement mechanisms, they're just words on paper, so Israel's defense minister can stand up and announce permanent military control of Gaza. He can announce settlement construction. He can directly contradict a signed peace agreement, and the most likely outcome is that eventually everyone accepts it. They'll stop calling it temporary occupation. They'll stop pretending withdrawal is coming. They'll just accept permanent Israeli military rule as the new normal. For Palestinians in Gaza, this means their nightmare continues. 2 years of bombing killed over 70,000 people, destroyed most of the buildings, shattered the economy, displaced almost everyone multiple times. They thought maybe the ceasefire meant an end was coming. Maybe reconstruction could start. Maybe they could rebuild their lives. Instead, they get 411 more people killed during the ceasefire. 875 violations of the agreement, half the promised aid, blocked medicine and food. And now an announcement that Israeli military control will be permanent, that settlements might return, that the occupation will never end. How do you process that news? How do you explain it to your kids living in a tent in the rain? How do you maintain hope when every promise turns out to be a lie? The answer is that many won't maintain hope. Some will turn to groups like Hamas who say armed resistance is the only option. Some will try to leave if borders ever open. Some will just survive day to day, numb to the bigger political picture, focused only on finding food and staying alive. This is what permanent occupation looks like. Not dramatic battles and big speeches, just grinding poverty, constant insecurity, no future to plan for, no hope things will improve, just existence under military control. Forever. That's what Israel Katz announced on December 23rd. Not in those exact words, But that's what permanent military rule means. That's what refusing to fully withdraw means. That's what settlements in northern Gaza mean. It means this war doesn't end. The names change. Maybe they stop calling it war and start calling it security operations. But for people in Gaza, the reality stays the same. Soldiers at checkpoints, drones overhead, bombs falling when Israel decides someone is a threat, borders controlled by another country, no voice in your own governance, no path to independence, no timeline for when it ends, because it doesn't end. That's the permanent part of permanent military rule. So that's where things stand as of December 23, 2025, a peace plan that promised complete Israeli withdrawal and possible Palestinian statehood now contradicted by Israel's own defense minister. A ceasefire violated 875 times, 411 Palestinians killed during supposed peace, humanitarian aid blocked, medicine scarce, winter storms flooding tent camps, and an announcement that Israeli settlements might return to Gaza after being gone for 20 years. The international community will likely issue statements. Trump and Netanyahu will meet. Diplomats will have meetings. But actual change seems unlikely. The pattern is too established. Israel expands its control. The world objects. Nothing happens. Israel's control becomes permanent. On to the next crisis. Meanwhile, Palestinians in Gaza live through another day of occupation, another day of uncertainty, another day wondering if this ceasefire will collapse completely like the others did, another day trying to survive in the ruins of their homes while being told their land might be taken for settlements. This is the reality behind the headlines about peace plans and ceasefire agreements. This is what it actually means when a defense minister says his country will never fully withdraw. It means permanent military rule over millions of people. It means no Palestinian state. It means the war might quiet down but never truly ends. And it means that despite all the negotiations and UN resolutions and international pressure, the fundamental dynamic doesn't change. One side has all the power, the other side has none. And the powerful side just announced it plans to stay that way forever. So what do you think about this announcement and what it means going forward? Drop your opinion in the comments. I'm reading them all. If this breakdown helped, hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.